All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're live on Facebook. This is our weekly Zoom meeting of Bhagavad Gita Talks with Brajasundari and me, Mahayogi, trying to shed some light on the Bhagavad Gita. We've so far covered 12 chapters of the book, which is quite a feat, I think. I was originally asked to speak on the first 6 chapters, but then they asked me to continue the talk, and I take that as my service to you all. So if you're out there in YouTube land or Facebook land or wherever you are, thank you for tuning in, and here we go. Om Jnanatirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatanvitam Tang Sagivam Advaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Param Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitangscha. Maline Mochanam Pungsam Jalasnanam Dine Dine Sakrid Gitamritam Snanam Sangsara Malanashanam. One may cleanse himself daily by taking a bath in water, but if one bathes even once in the sacred Ganges water of Bhagavad Gita, for him the dirt of material life is altogether vanished. Bharatamrita sarvasyam Vishnu Vaktrad Vinishritam Gita Gangorikam Pitva Punar Janmana Vidyate. One who drinks the water of the Ganges attains salvation. So, what to speak of one who drinks the nectar of Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita is the essential nectar of the Mahabharata, and it is spoken by Sri Krishna himself, the original Vishnu. Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dogda Gopalanandana Partho Vatsa Shudir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahat. The Gita Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, is the essence of all the Upanishads. It's just like a cow. Lord Krishna, who's famous as a cowherd boy, is milking this cow. Arjuna is just like a calf, and learned scholars and pure devotees are to drink the nectarine milk of Bhagavad Gita. Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Gitam, Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva, Eko Mantras Tasya Namani Jani, Karma Pyekam Tasya Devasya Seva. Prabhupada translates, in this present day, people are very much eager to have one scripture, one God, one religion, and one occupation. Therefore, Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Gitam, let there be one scripture only, Bhagavad Gita. Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva, let there be one God for the whole world, Sri Krishna. Eko Mantras Tasya Namani, and one hymn, one mantra, one prayer, the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, and one work only, the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, we've discussed 12 chapters of the Gita, and in the previous 6 chapters or so, Krishna describes bhakti, and he talks about bhakti from different points of view, and he gives different options. So there's karma mishra bhakti, or devotional service that's mixed with some karmic idea. you go to Krishna and you pray to Krishna for something, but you're not entirely free from any kind of material desire. You still want something. And then there's Jnana Mishra Bhakti, which means that your faith is not entirely whole, and you still need some convincing. Or also, you might still be addicted to the idea of moksha, or getting salvation from this material world. So it's the basic idea of Jnana Mishra Bhakti. And then there's Ananya Bhakti, which is pure Kevala Bhakti. So now, when we come to the 13th chapter, Arjuna wants to go back and sort of clean up, if you like, some of the ideas that have already been discussed, or elaborate a little bit on some of the ideas that have already been entertained. Looking at the commentary of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So Vishwanath Chakravarti, he comments that in the last 6 chapters of the Gita, we've seen different mixes of bhakti, but in the 10th chapter and other places, Kevala Bhakti is also shown indirectly to be supreme. Now, here in the 13th chapter, Krishna begins talking about the nature of soul, the nature of material energy. Vishwanath says, in the middle 6 chapters, it was mentioned that by Kevala Bhakti, one attains the Lord Bhagavan. And 3 other methods of worship were then described. Liberation arising from jnana mixed with bhakti was also briefly described. So the last 6 chapters begin to discuss all the main themes in the Gita with a little bit more detail. Atma, Bhagavan, Purush, Prakriti, Karma, Dharma, knowledge, work, ethics, divine love, dedication, and how are these things related? Also, time, creation, God, soul, karma, the world, and time. These things are all sort of wrapped up. So the 13th chapter talks about the subject and the object. In chapter 14, we'll see about the 3 modes of material nature. And then chapter 15 explains how to go beyond the modes and what the spiritual world might be like. Chapter 16 elaborates on the upward and downward transmigration of the soul through the different modes of material nature. Chapter 17 talks about the characteristics and traits of things which facilitate upward evolution through the 3 modes towards transcendence. And chapter 18 will close the book summarizing the entire message of the Gita. So here in the 13th chapter, we begin with a question from Arjuna. He says, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Ketragya Evacha Etad Veditum Ichchami Gyanam Gyayam Shakeshava. Arjuna says, oh, my dear Krishna, I wish to know about Prakriti, Purush, and Ketra and Ketragya. And the translation says, nature, the enjoyer, and the field and the knower of the field, and of knowledge and the object of knowledge. So I don't know if you can, if I get a, oh, there you go. In Srila Prabhupada's translation, nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness, right? In the this book published by Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mutt, the title of the chapter is interesting to me. It's given the distinction between matter and spirit. But you can see up here, it says Purush Prakriti Viveka Yoga. I'll come back to that. And now this is the first edition of the Hidden Treasure of the Sweet Absolute. And here, the translation is given as the predominated and the predominator. So it's kind of interesting to me why would you have three different translations of the same idea? Prakriti Purusha Viveka Yoga. So Prabhupada has nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. First edition says predominator and predominated. And the later edition says matter and spirit. Well, I think predominator and predominated, maybe at some point, whoever edited the chapter titles thought this is difficult to understand. So they said, well, matter and spirit. And I don't know who gave the chapter titles for this translation, this publication of, whoops, there it is, Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. Was that Prabhupada himself or Jayadvaita, the editor? But the Sanskrit says Purusha Prakriti Vivek Yoga. Now, Vivek, it means to break something down or to analyze it. So we're looking at an analysis or a discrimination, discernment, like that breakdown. There's a book by Bhaktivinoda Thakur called the Tattva Vivek. So it means the breakdown of truth, right? So here we're looking at a breakdown of Purush and Prakriti. Now, you have to sort of read the chapter to understand the breakdown. But I guess I'll just try to break it down and introduce the meaning, and then you'll see that it will repeat. So the word Purush, it means person, right? But also means the enjoyer. And the word Prakriti, it means something like energy, but also spirit. So if you look at it in terms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then Purusha is Krishna and Prakriti is everything else, or Krishna's energy. Purusha and Prakriti, in terms of Shiva, it means Shiva and Shakti. So there's Shiva and Parvati, or Shiva and Durga, or the energy and the energetic, or the sun and the sunshine. It's a very good example used by Ramanuja a lot. And I'll come back to that example. But the idea is Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. So there you got the enjoyer. So we're talking about Purush, right? Purush means the enjoyer. Nature, well, that's Prakriti. So you have the enjoyer and nature. Now, when it comes to you and me, we think we are the enjoyers. Everybody's always telling me, enjoy your life, Mahayogi. What are you doing with all these books and all this thinking? That's no good. Enjoy your life. And sometimes that rubs me the wrong way because it doesn't seem to me that that's what Srila Sridhar Maharaj was teaching. Enjoy your life. That seems to be superficial, right? In fact, by considering ourselves to be the enjoyer, we're setting ourselves up as God. See, I am the Lord and Master of all I survey. I look out and see it's a beautiful day, and I think, yes, it's a beautiful day, and it was good. I woke up, and when I was asleep, there was nothing, but I opened my eyes, and there was the world. As if I create the world, I am God, I am the enjoyer, and this is nature. So, in a sense, because we're trapped by illusion, we think I am the Purush and this is my Prakriti. But on a higher level, God is the Purush and the material nature, and in fact, all the souls are Prakriti. So the idea of Prakriti, Purush, Vivek is very pregnant with meaning, because Purush means the subject, and Prakriti means the object. It's just another way of looking at it, subject and object. Well, I'm the subject. In my universe, I'm number one. I'm the subject, and this world is my object. But Arjuna is asking Krishna, can you explain that a little bit? What do you mean by that? What's the Purush? What's Prakriti? And so Krishna, he tells you, he says, idam shariram konteya ketram ityabhidiyate etadyo veti tam praku ketragya iti tadvida. He's giving a definition. He says, this body is the field, and one who knows the body is the knower of the field. And Vishwanath Chakravarti, he says, this verse answers the question, what is the field and who is the knower of the field? The body with senses, the abode of enjoyment, is the field, since it is the basis for sprouting the tree of repeated births. He who knows that body in terms of I and mine is in the conditioned state. And that's the jiva. So it's interesting, the idea of field, if you think about Einstein and the unified field theory. In a sense, we're talking about phenomenon, or everything that is beyond my particular existence, or everything that surrounds my personal spiritual experience. That's phenomenon, and that's the field. But in a more restricted sense, you're talking about the body. So later, in our next verse, Krishna says, Ketra gyam chapiman vidi sarva ketreshu bharata ketra ketra gayor gyanam yataj gyanam matam mama. He says, oh sign of Bharat, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies. And to understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. That is my opinion. So, in a nutshell, Krishna is discussing phenomenology, or spiritual energy and its relationship with the world, ontology, or the very nature of being. What is Atma? Because the idea of Atma includes the idea of Paramatma in a general sense. The seers of the truth, Vadanti tattva vidas tattvam, the knowers of tattva, the Vedantis, yaj jnanam advayam. They say that real non-dual knowledge means understanding Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavan iti shabdyate. They must know Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. How are these three ideas, Brahman or God in sort of general way, spirit, Paramatma, or the indwelling supersoul, and Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How is it possible that we can consider these things as one truth? If you can understand that, then you know what knowledge is. So the Christians, they have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But Bhagavatam talks about Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So if you can accommodate some sort of threefold division in divinity as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, why not accommodate the idea of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan? And Krishna says, this is knowledge. If you understand that, you want to know what Gyan is? Okay, fine. This is what you need to wrap your mind around that. Knowing that, then you know everything. And he says, this is my opinion. He says, now please hear my brief description of this field of activity and how it's constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, who the knower of the field of activities is, and what his influences are. Rishi Bir Bahuda Gitam, Chando Bir Vividai Pritak, Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva, Hetumad Bir Vinishchita. He says that knower of the field of activities and of the knower, this knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower is described by various sages in Vedic writings, especially in Vedanta Sutra, with all reasoning as to cause and effect. So Krishna is the highest authority in explaining what knowledge is. After all, he's Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and this is the Bhagavad Gita. So still, he refers to Shastra and says, according to the sages, here's what the Brahma Sutra says. So it's kind of interesting, because if you try to create a different interpretation, you're going up against Krishna and the Brahma Sutras. It's almost as if Krishna is giving his commentary. He's saying, this is my commentary on the Brahma Sutras. Now, when Krishna says, I'm the knower, and the soul is also the knower, then there are those who would argue, well, you see, the Atma and the Paramatma are one. Krishna and the soul are one. He says so right here. He says, you're the knower of the field, and I'm the knower of the field. So it's all one. But Krishna's drawing a distinction here. The word vivek means distinction. He's making a distinction between Purush and Prakriti. Then if everything is one, why make a distinction? And Baladev Vidyabhushan, basing his opinions on Ramanujacharya, he says, if Krishna and Arjuna are one, what is the point of Krishna trying to teach something to Arjuna? It's an absurd idea. So in a very powerful way, what's said here in the 13th chapter goes towards establishing Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. Now, Madhvacharya, he's very interesting because he doesn't like the idea that it's all one. So he goes very far to say, no, it's not all one. It's never all one. It's always two. So if you consider material nature, the jiva or the soul, the atma, and the paramatma or God, they're always different. Okay, the soul, the atma is not the paramatma. It's never the paramatma. Atma is atma and paramatma is paramatma, and never the twain shall meet. They're distinct. The world is not paramatma. Paramatma is not the world. The soul is not the world, and the world is not the soul. So Madhvacharya establishes this extreme distinction. And so his philosophy is called dualism or Dvaita Vad. But this didn't entirely satisfy everyone. Later, Ramanujacharya, he has what's called Vishishta Dvaita Vad, where he says, well, okay, we accept distinction, but in some sense, we also see a certain amount of intermingling between these different worlds, so that the soul is somehow entangled in this material world. It's very difficult to understand where matter begins and where spirit ends, or where spirit begins and matter ends. For example, if you close your eyes tightly in the dark, you'll see, or with a bit of light, if you close your eyes tightly, you can see little tiny things floating across your screen. And those are bacteria that are sitting on your eyeball. So those bacteria, they're living beings, aren't they? They have independence, they can move, they try to survive. In fact, the air is saturated with living beings in the form of bacteria. So that's why they want us to wear, masks. We have masks to protect ourselves from the living beings that are floating in the air. A virus, on the other hand, it's not really defined as living material. It can affect living material, but it's not considered to be a living being itself. But there's some debate about that. So where does living material begin and leave off? What's really matter? The nature of matter itself is also difficult to understand. We think of matter in terms of shape and form and extension and movement through time and space and color and things like that. But animals see color differently than we do. You can't establish that something is absolutely blue, because when it's seen by a fly or a bee or an elephant, it's different. Fish see things differently than we do. They smell differently. Plants can see and detect ultraviolet and infrared. So the absolute nature of reality in terms of matter is very difficult to establish. And the absolute division between spirit and matter is also very difficult to establish. So Ramanuja says, look at the sun and the sun's rays. The sun is energetic. The rays are energy. Sun rays are sunshine. That's sun, isn't it? But the sun itself has properties that sunshine does not. So there's a difference of degree, but there's a certain amount of similarity. Milk and yogurt are really nothing but the same thing, but milk and yogurt serve different purposes. They can't really be used for the same thing. So the distinction between Atma and Paramatma is there, but it's not so easy to brand, and it requires a certain amount of contemplation to get to the heart of that. So Krishna recommends contemplation and knowledge in this chapter. He says, the knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower is described by the rishis. And in the next verse, the next couple of verses, he says, you should contemplate this, and this is what knowledge is. So I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about. I think it's pretty clear, right? It's pretty clear. So what Krishna is describing as the Ketra, the field, he explains in another way, a couple verses down. He says, well, the field of activities, what is that? Earth, fire, water, air, ether, and then a little bit more subtle, false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses, and the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate life symptoms and convictions. All these, in summary, are the field of activities and its interactions. In other words, phenomenon. Prabhupada's basing his Gita commentary here mostly on Baladev Vidibhushan. And he says here, the 5 great elements are a gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called the materialistic conception, or tamasa buddhi, intelligence and ignorance. This further represents the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of material nature. The unmanifested modes of material nature are called pradhan. Now, this sounds very technical and difficult to understand, but there's a very good book by Srila Sridhar Maharaj. It's called The Subjective Evolution of Consciousness. I have a copy here somewhere, where he explains that what we think of as matter is a manifestation of consciousness, that consciousness is all pervading, it's everywhere, and it manifests itself in different concrete representations, which appear to us phenomenologically as earth, water, fire, air, ether, matter, and so on. But without consciousness, this cannot stand. And if you examine the nature of consciousness, as Atma sort of hardens or congeals into material energy, it passes through different stages. And one of the important ones is called false ego, or ahankara, and then gradually congeals more and more until it becomes earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, and intelligence, and false ego. Now, exactly how that happens, this is extremely difficult to understand through analysis. And in fact, you may break your brain trying to do that. But the easiest way to arrive at knowledge is by understanding the nature of your own soul. You can understand that you are eternal, that you're not this body, that this body is, it's temporary, it comes and goes. It's very strange and mystical. I cut my finger the other day. I sliced my thumb open, right? What happened? It's okay, it healed, right? How did that take place? It's miraculous, right? How does a seed become a tree? There's something inside that seed that turns into a tree. How? If you can say, oh, well, it's, RNA or DNA, or there's some chemicals inside that seed. But if you expose the seed to radiation, or you burn it, or just let it dry, it won't sprout. Why not? What is there inside the seed that makes it sprout? We don't know. The scientists cannot combine chemicals into a seed. You can analyze what's in there. What's inside a corn seed? You know, how difficult could it be to make a little plastic capsule with the same ingredients that a corn kernel has, and then put water on it and make it grow? But you can't do that because it's not a living being. Where does the soul come from? So this sort of meditation is, or contemplation, is useful in developing what Krishna calls knowledge. So in the next verse, he says, there's 4 verses that are sort of bundled together. Amanvitam adambhidvan ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyo pasanam shocham staryam atma vinigriha. So Krishna here is describing what knowledge is, which is fascinating, because in schools all over the world, teachers want to know, well, what do we teach? It's very strange having children, because our generation will die. That's guaranteed. And somehow we have to pass along all the knowledge of human civilization to the next generation. And you have a time frame of about 10 years to do it, between when a child is 5 years old and 15 years old. You have to teach them what a wristwatch is, what a pencil is, how does a screw work, you know, what medicine is, all these things. So in schools, teachers have to sit down and think about, well, what's knowledge? What are we going to teach this year? Do we do the history of Georgia, or the history of Ireland, or the history of Mexico? Or we think, well, maybe that's not so important. What's more important is, how does a human hand work? You know, you have to sit down and define what is knowledge and how are we going to transmit this. So Krishna here, he's telling you, this is knowledge. Okay, I won't read all the Sanskrit because it takes time, but he says humility, right? That's knowledge. Really? Humility? I thought knowledge was go out and get what you want and be aggressive and, you know, don't show anybody any mercy. That's knowledge. No, Krishna says humility. Why? Well, practice humility and you'll understand its value. Pridelessness, adambhidvan, pridelessness, don't be proud. Ahimsa, non-violence. Really? I thought Gandhi had been refuted. But here it is, ahimsa. Krishna says that's knowledge, non-violence, kshanti, tolerance. It means your child comes up to you and says, oh, Mommy, I hate you. So you can say, shut up. Or you count to 10 and you say, did you have a good day at school, Johnny? You know, ahimsa, pridelessness, kshanti, tolerance. So right here, Krishna is giving you trinada pi sunichena, tarora pi sahishnana, amanina manadena. Don't expect anything from this world. Be humble, be tolerant. That's knowledge. Simplicity, arjavam. Why? Because it's one thing to have what you want, and it's something to want what you have. Be happy with what you have. And don't want things. And then you discover peace. But if you're always thinking, I need this, I want that, I need this, I have to work for that. Well, to work for what I want, I have to get on the bus and I need money for the bus. and then I have to work. It's a strange sort of vicious circle. So simplicity is being praised here. Acharya Upasanam, approach an acharya, a spiritual master. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have the spiritual master holding your hand as you walk through every single day of your life, but it means approach someone who knows more than you do. Approach someone who is closer to God than you are, and try to take some instruction. Shocham, cleanliness. That's knowledge. Be clean. Steadfastness, stairyam, steadfastness. Chastity, atma vinigraha, self-control. Oh no, really? Self-control? That doesn't sound like any fun. Indriya arteshu, self-control in the matter of the senses. This doesn't mean that you have to starve yourself and fast to death. It means don't let the senses master you. Be the master of your senses. And you will be happy if you follow this path. But at the beginning, it doesn't seem like happiness. It seems like if I take drugs and get high and dance and have lots of sex and swim naked at the beach with my crazy friends, that's fun. But what you discover by controlling the senses is that you come to a higher plane, you come to knowledge. You cannot have knowledge when you're distracted all the time by sensual enjoyment. It's impossible. Just as a teacher in the classroom, I noticed that all the children are plugged into their cell phones, and the cell phone gives them instant gratification. And because of the instant gratification, they can't concentrate. They can't think about anything. So take control of the senses. Another thing that Krishna considers as knowledge is to be without false ego, anahankara. That doesn't mean that you have to destroy your ego. Sometimes devotees try to do that. They try to completely, it's like throwing battery acid on their ego to dissolve it. Like criminals, they used to put acid on their fingertips to dissolve their fingerprints. But you can't do that. It doesn't work. It's artificial. It leads to what's called bhoga tyag, where you give something up now, and then later you think, all right, I gave that up for a week. Now it's time for me. You don't eat chocolate for 6 months. And then you go, okay, that's it. That's enough. I've had it. I'm going to sit down and really eat some chocolate now. So this negation of your ego, it doesn't work. But you can try to come to grips with your ego through compassion, through service, through dedication, and in that way find a higher sense of purpose, a higher ego in divine love or bhakti. How? Well, here's some ideas. The perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So if you keep that in front of you, then that helps you control your senses. You can see, well, I'm not here forever. There's birth, death, old age, and disease. That makes you sober. Freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest. This means your children are wonderful. There's nothing like children. But entanglement means you want to impress your point of view, your opinion, your idea of how they should be upon them. And it probably won't work. You think that little Johnny's going to be a rocket scientist. And later, what he really likes is girls and motorcycles. You know, and you tell him, no, you're supposed to be a rocket scientist. You know, we have experience with our own parents. So wife, home, the rest, all these things are temporary. Even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events. And Krishna says this again and again in the Gita, right? Janma mrityu jara vyadi dukkha doshana darshanam. That's word for word what he says in the second chapter. Understand the nature of birth and death. That's knowledge. If you think you're going to live forever, that's not knowledge. He says, constant and unalloyed devotion to me. Well, that's the nutshell of the Gita. Aspiring to live in a solitary place. That's interesting. Detachment from the general mass of people. So you notice devotees, sometimes they live solitary lives. I like to sit here in my little library and read the Bhagavad Gita and study things and talk to you. Don't really like, I live in Mexico, I don't really like the big fiestas with the explosions and the pyrotechnicas and all that. I don't know. Devotees are a little bit agoraphobic in that sense. You know, Pranashishi lives there in his quiet little place with his garden, you know, and Brajasundari, she understands that these things, these situations are temporary. So if you look at devotees also, you can study them and you'll see they have these good qualities. Accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth. And maybe you, because you're devotees, you think, yes, I like that. I like the importance of self-realization, philosophical search for the absolute truth. That's cool. But a lot of people don't. They think that's a waste of time. You know, if your parents ask you, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And you say, well, I'm interested in the importance of self-realization. They may tell you, really? Why? Can't you get a good job? Can't you make more money? Can't you buy a bigger house and a bigger car and work harder? People ask me, Mike, why do you live in Mexico? I like it here. I can relax and study my books and, you know, yeah, but look, you could go to the United States. Why? Well, you could work and make lots of money. Sure, but if I live in the United States, it's expensive. I'd have to pay more money just to live there. Yeah, that's true, but you could save your money. And then what? Well, if you work really hard and you save your money, then you could, I don't know, travel. You could go to Mexico. And what would I do there? You could paint and play your ukulele and chant your Hare Krishna and read your Bhagavad Gita. But I do that. I'm already there. So why should I work hard just because you think that's a value? For me, self-realization is a value. I'm not there yet. I've spent 45, 50 years, maybe more. Yeah, I'll say 50 years. It's a nice round number. Since I started reading the Bhagavad Gita, thinking about self-realization as a value, you know, philosophical search for the absolute truth. And people are like, well, there's no absolute truth. Oh, is that the absolute truth? People say that all the time, you know. You hear it on the TV, you hear it, you know, advertisement, movies, right? That's always when people, any movie that has a deep philosophical truth, that's the one. There is no truth. You know, Bob, what I've learned through my years, there's no truth, you know. Oh, so you read Nietzsche, because that's what he said back in the 19th century. I read him too. Interesting argument. But he also makes the point that whatever your philosophy is, it's self-interested. You only you're only putting that out there because somehow it serves your interest. So it serves your interest to say there is no truth, number one. And number two, is that the truth? The truth is there is no truth. Okay, but that's another absolute truth, isn't it? So you have your absolute truth, I have mine. And I like this one. See, this is my absolute truth. It's called the Bhagavad Gita. It's older than Nietzsche. He didn't get a chance to read it. Maybe if he did, you know, he might have changed his mind. But your truth that there is no truth, that's your poetry. My truth that there is a truth, and it's Bhagavan. That's my poetry, and I like it. And I've been looking at it for 50 years. And you know what? I've read a lot. Look at all the books I've got. You can see. And I have never found anything else as cool as the Bhagavad Gita, with the exception of the Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the teachings of Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj. It's interesting. I have a friend of mine who studies a devotee. He's been a devotee for a long time. And now he's studying Sanskrit. And some of his friends don't like that because, like, oh, you're a Gyani, you don't need that. But I'm kind of a Gyani. I like to read. I don't discourage him. I said, no, it's good. Read the Sanskrit, but you'll discover, if you really study a lot, what you will discover, you know, after you go to your Sanskrit teacher and they teach you the verbs and the grammar and all that, what you will discover is that Sridhar Maharaj was the best teacher. You'll discover that whatever they teach you in Sanskrit school, you know, it will come up to a certain level, but everything Sridhar Maharaj told you was coming in at this level, because not only was he a great Sanskrit scholar, but he understood meaning and knowledge. I had a talk with, I think it was Advai Krishna, or maybe it was Pranashisha, I can't remember. We were talking about Sridhar Maharaj and Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And people who are trying to be sadhus, like I'm trying to be a sadhu, you know, a saintly person. But he told me, Sridhar Maharaj was a sadhu. That's who he was. He couldn't avoid that. Like if we talk about ego and trying to get rid of the ego of being a man, a woman, an Israeli, a Russian, an American. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj, his ego was the ego of a sadhu through and through. He didn't have to work at it. It's who he was. So you can study Sanskrit, but you've already had the best teacher. So another thing that's kind of interesting here, in terms of thinking about Gyan and Jnana Shunya Bhakti, we know that Jnana Shunya Bhakti is a value, but Krishna here, he's telling you, I consider this to, I'm Krishna, I consider this to be knowledge. And I'm not telling you knowledge is bad, erudition is bad, chastity to the institution, that's the real thing. No, Krishna says, all these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever they may be, is ignorance. So Jnana Shunya Bhakti, that's a beautiful thing. That's what we aspire to, you know, but you also cannot imitate that. I'm getting a sign from Braja Sundari. It's time for us to stop. That was 1 hour.
No. Sorry, there is a sound because I'm in a restaurant. Actually, I have a question.
Okay,
because
good.
you do you
I'm
hear
sorry,
me
I
well?
just talk and talk.
Yes, do you hear me well?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. The question is that you've said that Krishna said that this proper knowledge is a real knowledge. But as far as I understand, all this knowledge is connected with material world, not with spiritual world, because it's connected with the gross elements and with subtle elements and with
No,
actions and senses. But it is not connected with spiritual world or what?
no.
Sorry.
Well, let's see how does Prabhupada comment on this? He says, this process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. So no, Krishna's explaining, search for the absolute truth, having self-realization as a value, humility, tolerance, cleanliness, accepting a spiritual master. These are aspects or practices that develop into knowledge of the absolute, knowledge of, in particular, because this chapter is focusing on the soul, the nature of the material world, and God, knowledge about that. But knowledge about God is transcendental. Understanding Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdite. What is soul? What is supersoul? And what is the Supreme Personality of Godhead? That kind of knowledge is very special spiritual knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I sort of crossed in and out of that because I was talking about school. And I was thinking, well, you know, what do we teach in school? What's useful? What's knowledge? But Krishna here is talking about real knowledge. Go ahead. You're not convinced. But see, on a higher level, we're told, well, in the end, you want to discard knowledge. Just do it. You know, Arjuna doesn't need all this talk. Pick up your bow and your arrow and go out there and do it and fight. You know, if the guru tells you change the tire on the car, you don't have to get into, okay, but the tire comes from rubber and they make rubber in the Amazon forest, but that's bad because they're burning the forest. So that's karmic, right? I don't think I can change the tire. That's a karmic activity. And then the guru tells you, oh, well, you know, actually they don't use Amazon rubber in tire making anymore. Oh, they use petroleum. But what about the war in Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan and all that? You know, that's even more karma. So Jnana Shunya Bhakti means, no, you just change the tire. But that doesn't mean that we're meant to be fools. Because then anybody can just say, I am the guru, I am the acharya, follow me. Why? Because this guy over here says that I am the guru. Oh, he did? Oh, okay. Now go get money. Money, why? Because we need money. I need money. That's your service. Get money. What about, you know, Krishna and books? And we don't need books. No more books. What we need is money. Go get money. Well, maybe. It might be. Could be. Depends. Right? Who are you serving? Why? But see, we're told to have faith. And faith is higher. Faith is more than knowledge. Knowledge serves faith sometimes. But sometimes too much knowledge is a bad thing. Why? Because it's analytical. See? So if I say, okay, I'm going to analyze this world, you know, with Sankhya, And I come to the conclusion there's spirit and matter. Okay, that's good. There's a supreme spirit, God. I should serve God. Okay, that's good. That's knowledge. But knowledge can go in a different direction and say, well, but how do I know? But why? I used to have these students, they used to just drive me crazy because whatever I told them, they would say, but why, teacher, why? You know, and in the beginning, I would give them an explanation, but later I realized they're just wasting my time. But why, teacher, why? Well, because ABC. But why? Well, DEF. But why? So the nature of the mind and intelligence, especially intelligence, is to question. And that's good. Something doesn't work. We think, well, why doesn't that? Maybe it's this, maybe it's not that. So it's just neti. But when you apply your neti to faith, it destroys your faith and you become a Buddhist. So Krishna doesn't consider that knowledge. He considers contemplation of the soul, the Paramatma, and Bhagavan as knowledge. Okay, I don't know if I made myself clear. Okay, you're not translating anything today, you're listening, right?
Yes, because there is no Russian-speaking
There's
people. There were
nobody
only
here.
three of us. There were
Pranashish
only
is
three
here.
of us. Yes.
Help me out. I'm sorry, Pranashish, you know, I'm just going blah, 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 blah. That's not good. I don't like that. Tell me, say hello. Tell me something. Unmute. Can I unmute? Ask to unmute. Here. Unmute. Unmutation.
Please turn on the sound.
Okay. This is some sort of weird kabuki theater. Anyways, that's basically thank you for tuning in, Pranashish. I appreciate it. You know, that's basically, so the idea of the 13th chapter then is Prakriti Purush Vivek. So Prakriti, it means energy, right? But Radha is Krishna's Prakriti. You know, so Prakriti and Purush also on a higher level, it means Hare Krishna. Like Brahma and Saraswati is Prakriti and Purush. Prakriti means Mother Nature, right? But in Hinduism, Mother Nature is Amami, it's Durga, Prakriti, and Purush is Shiva. But on a higher level, you know, there's Lakshmi, Vishnu, Radha, Krishna. That's Prakriti Purush. So it's superficial to title the chapter The Difference Between Matter and Spirit, because we're not only talking about matter and spirit, we're talking about the goddess principle. Well, I don't know, we lost Braja Sundari. Anyways, now I just feel like this whole thing is a big, massive ego trip. Can you unmute? Are you there? I can't hear you. I don't know. I'm supposed to be the co-host. Allow participants to start video, rename themselves. Okay. Well, I think Braja Sundari, she said she's in a restaurant somewhere with a laptop. She's in Georgia now, which is in the south of Russia, I think. So, all right, man. I don't want to take more of your time. Thank you very much for for listening. This is Mahayogi over and out, and adios. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.